Every member of the Griffin family is broken in a specific, identifiable way, and the show has quietly told you exactly why. Behind the jokes, behind the cutaways, behind the chaos, each Griffin carries a backstory dark enough to explain everything wrong with them. Peter's stupidity, Lois's frustration, Meg's misery, Chris's anxiety, Stewie's rage, even Brian's self-destruction. None of it is random. It all traces back to a wound. Today we're digging into the dark backstory behind every single Griffin family member. And by the end, you'll understand that this isn't a family of cartoon characters. It's a family of trauma responses wearing cartoon faces. Because here's the unifying idea, the thread that runs through all of them. Every Griffin is the way they are, because of how they were shaped, and once you see the shaping, the jokes stop being just jokes and start being symptoms. We're going to go through each family member one by one, uncover the wound underneath, and then connect them all at the end, because the family's collective dysfunction adds up to something bigger and darker than any individual story. Let's start with the head of the household, Peter. We laugh at Peter's stupidity, but his backstory reframes it entirely. Peter was raised in a strict, joyless, oppressive environment, dominated by harsh authority and a complete absence of warmth or encouragement. A child raised under crushing control and zero affection often responds in one of two ways, either by becoming rigid and controlling themselves, or by fleeing into pure-eyed, into childishness, into a refusal to ever grow up. Peter chose the second path. His relentless immaturity, his inability to take anything seriously, his desperate pursuit of fun at any cost. It's all the rebellion of a man who was never allowed to be a kid, finally getting to be one, forever, no matter the consequences. And here's the first signpost. Peter's defining trait, his stupidity, isn't really stupidity at all. It's avoidance. It's a man who learned early that engaging seriously with the world brought pain, so he simply stopped engaging seriously with anything. His foolishness is armor. Hold on to that idea, that each Griffin's most obvious flaw is actually a defense mechanism against an old wound, because it applies to every single one of them. Now let's turn to Lois. On the surface, Lois is the long-suffering voice of reason, the put-upon wife managing a household of lunatics. But her backstory reveals something more complicated. Lois came from wealth and privilege, from a cold, status-obsessed family that valued image over love. Her rebellion was to reject that world, to marry beneath her station, to choose chaos over the suffocating perfection she grew up in. But the wound runs deeper than rebellion. Underneath Lois's patience is a restlessness, a wild streak, a hunger for excitement and danger that keeps surfacing in unexpected and often destructive ways. She didn't just leave her cold upbringing behind, she's still running from it, still proving she's not the person her family wanted her to be. And that flight defines her more than her role as a mother ever could. Let's move to the child everyone forgets, Meg. And Meg's backstory might be the darkest of all, because it's not a single event, it's a continuous condition. Meg is the family's scapegoat, the one who absorbs everyone else's cruelty, the target for the abuse, neglect and contempt that the rest of the family can't process about themselves. Her wound isn't in the past, it's ongoing, inflicted fresh in nearly every episode. The dark truth about Meg is that her role exists to serve the family's mental health at the cost of her own. By dumping all their negativity onto Meg, the other Griffins get to feel better about themselves. She's not a person to them, she's a pressure valve, and the trauma of growing up as the designated punching bag explains everything about her, her low self-esteem, her desperation for approval, her recurring breakdowns. Here's the plan for the end. Meg's role as the family scapegoat is the clue to the whole picture. A scapegoat only exists because a family needs one, which means the entire Griffin family system depends on having someone to absorb its damage. Remember that, because when we connect all these backstories at the end, Meg is the key that explains how this broken family stays functional at all. Now let's look at Chris. Chris is anxious, awkward, and deeply insecure, and his backstory explains why. Caught between an overgrown child of a father and the toxic family dynamics swirling around him, Chris never had a stable model of how to be a person. He's haunted by his own intrusive thoughts, by anxieties he can't control, by a sense that there's something wrong inside him that he doesn't understand. Chris's wound is the absence of guidance, a boy left to figure out an overwhelming inner life with no one paying enough attention to help him. His awkwardness is the result of a kid who was never taught how to navigate himself, left alone with fears too big to handle. And then there's Stewie, whose dark backstory we've explored before, but which fits the pattern perfectly. Stewie is a genius starved of recognition, an extraordinary mind trapped in a family that can't see him, raised in the same emotionally neglectful environment that shaped everyone else. His rage, his schemes, his loneliness, all of it stems from being profoundly unseen. And Brian, the family dog, carries his own wound, the existential terror of a creature who is brilliant and self-aware, but trapped in a life he feels is beneath his potential, drowning his disappointment in alcohol and pretension. Brian's self-destruction is the despair of someone who believes he was meant for more and can't escape what he is. And that's where we connect it all, the payoff to everything we planted. Look at the pattern: a father escaping into childishness, a mother fleeing her past, a daughter absorbing all the pain, a son left to drown in his own anxiety, a baby starved of recognition, a dog despairing of his own existence. This isn't 6 separate sad stories, it's one system. The Griffin family is a closed loop of dysfunction, where each member's wound feeds the others. Peter's avoidance creates the chaos. Lois's restlessness fails to contain it. The pain gets dumped onto Meg so everyone else can survive. Chris is neglected in the shuffle. Stewie is unseen, and Brian watches it all and drinks. Remove any one piece, and the whole fragile system would collapse, which is exactly why nothing ever changes. Let me go deeper on how these wounds actively feed each other, because the Griffin family isn't just 6 damaged people sharing a house. It's a machine where each person's damage powers the next. Start with how Peter's wound creates everyone else's daily reality. Because Peter escaped his joyless childhood by refusing to ever grow up, he's emotionally absent as a father and husband, present in body but never in maturity. That absence forces Lois into the role of the only adult, which feeds her exhaustion and her restless need to escape, which makes her emotionally unavailable in her own way. 2 parents, both checked out for different reasons rooted in their own histories, leave a vacuum at the center of the family, and the children grow up falling into that vacuum, each coping however they can. Now watch how the pain flows downhill. A family full of unprocessed wounds generates a constant supply of negativity, frustration, shame, and self-loathing that has to go somewhere. Healthy families process these feelings. The Griffins don't have the tools for that, so instead they dump them, and they dump them onto Meg. Meg's role as the scapegoat isn't cruelty for its own sake, it's a survival mechanism for the whole system. By making Meg the target, every other Griffin gets to offload the feelings they can't handle about themselves. Peter feels less like a failure when he can mock Meg. Lois feels less trapped when she has someone beneath her. The whole family's mental health is quietly subsidized by Meg's suffering, which is why they can never let her escape the role. If Meg ever stood up and refused to be the punching bag, the family's pain would have nowhere to go, and the entire system would face the thing it's been avoiding, itself. Meanwhile, the family's limited attention gets consumed by the loudest wounds: Peter's chaos, Lois's drama, Stewie's schemes, leaving the quieter children to fend for themselves. Chris gets neglected in the noise, left alone with anxieties no one helps him manage. Stewie's genius goes unrecognized because everyone's too busy with the immediate fires to notice the extraordinary child in the high chair. Each person's wound competes for a finite supply of care, and the ones who don't demand attention loudly enough simply don't get any. The family runs on triage, always tending the loudest crisis, never the deepest one. And presiding over all of it is Brian, the observer, intelligent enough to see exactly how dysfunctional the whole system is and powerless to change it, which is its own special torment. Brian's drinking and despair are partly the result of being the one family member self-aware enough to understand the trap and incapable of escaping it. He sees the machine clearly, names it in his pretentious way, and then pours himself another drink, because seeing the prison doesn't unlock the door. In a sense, Brian's awareness makes him the most trapped of all, because the others at least have the mercy of not fully understanding their situation. So here's the bigger idea this teaches you, about the Griffins and about families in general. Dysfunctional families aren't just collections of damaged individuals. They're systems, where each person's role and wound locks the others in place. The Griffins stay broken not because they can't heal, but because the brokenness is load-bearing. Each member's pain serves a function in keeping the whole thing standing, and the saddest part is that they're all just doing their best with the wounds they were given, playing the only roles they ever learned, in a family that needs them to stay exactly as broken as they are. There's one more layer to all of this. And it's the question of where these wounds even came from. Because trauma doesn't appear from nowhere. It's inherited. Peter's joyless, controlling upbringing didn't start with Peter. It was passed down to him by parents who were almost certainly shaped by their own cold upbringing before that. Lois's status-obsessed family didn't invent their coldness. They inherited it from generations who valued image over affection. The Griffins aren't the beginning of their dysfunction. They're the current link in a long chain, each generation handing its unhealed wounds to the next, dressed up in slightly different forms but fundamentally the same. That's the genuinely dark part, and it's the thing the show gestures at without ever quite saying out loud. The Griffin children aren't just suffering from their parents' flaws, they're being trained to repeat them. Chris is learning by example that the way to handle pain is to ignore it. Meg is learning that her role is to absorb what others won't face. Stewie is learning that the world won't see him, so he'd better make it fear him instead. These aren't just sad childhoods, they're the next generation of wounds being carefully, unconsciously installed, ready to be passed down again whenever these kids have families of their own. The cycle doesn't end with the Griffins, it runs through them. And the frozen timeline we've talked about elsewhere makes this even bleaker, because it means the family never gets the chance to break the cycle. In a real family, time offers the possibility of healing, of growing up, of doing better than your parents did. The Griffins are denied that possibility entirely. They're locked in place, repeating the same wounds forever, never aging into the wisdom that might let them heal. The dark backstory of every Griffin isn't just an explanation for who they are. It's a sentence they can never serve out, a diagnosis with no possibility of recovery, because the show will never let them change enough to get better. So next time you watch the Griffins tear each other apart, look past the jokes to the wounds underneath. Watch Peter avoid. Watch Lois run. Watch the family pour its pain onto Meg. Once you see the system, the show transforms from random chaos into a surprisingly honest portrait of how families pass their damage down and around, generation after generation, never quite naming it, never quite escaping it. The Griffins are funny because they're broken, but they're broken in ways that are painfully, recognizably human, and that recognition is exactly why the family has stayed in our living rooms for so long. We don't just laugh at them. On some level, we see our own families in them, the same avoidances, the same scapegoats, the same wounds handed quietly down, and that flicker of recognition is the darkest joke the show ever told. The Griffins survive not in spite of being broken, but because of it, and that uncomfortable truth is what gives the comedy its surprising weight. So which Griffin backstory hit you the hardest? Which one do you think explains the most about who they are? Tell me in the comments, because I think we'll all have different answers. If this made you see the whole family in a new light, hit that like button and share it with the friend who thinks Family Guy has no depth, because clearly it does. And stick around, because the Griffins aren't the only ones with stories to tell. Next, we're counting down every celebrity Family Guy has brutally roasted.